The start of the next world war could be closer than we'd like to think. That's the view of global security and military experts who see China's increasingly aggressive tone as a hint of its imminent ambitions. And Beijing's posturing over Taiwan has become more and more pointed. President Xi Jinping has made it one of his key priorities to reunify the island territory, by force if necessary. Jamie Seidel is a foreign affairs contributor for news.com.au. Jamie, what's the history of Taiwan and China, and why does Beijing want it back so badly?
The ownership of Taiwan is a very long and convoluted story. Naturally, the Taiwanese think that Taiwan belongs to them, whether they were the indigenous Taiwanese that have been there for centuries or the third or fourth generation ex-Chinese that are living there now. So after World War II, China was given a United Nations mandate to look after the island until its future could be sorted out. But with the Chinese Civil War, the losing side fled to Taiwan and set up an alternative base of government there, and that's where the problems lie.
Would they really use military force though? That seems like a risky strategy.
Using military force is a drastic option. For decades, China has been using a strategy of coercion, a strategy of enticement, almost trying to create a fait accompli just through its diplomacy and propaganda. But that's all starting to backfire. So the more China needs Taiwan, the more likely it's going to be that it will invade Taiwan.
Let's say China makes a move. What does that mean for the West? Does America have no choice but to intervene?
Well, the West and America always have a choice. There's no compulsion for them to do so. The United States has an agreement with Taiwan that it will defend it in case of attack. But at the same time, the United States says that Taiwan's part of China. It just doesn't agree which China is the China it thinks is China. So it would be very difficult for the United States to back down from its position as the world's policeman with any remaining credibility after Afghanistan if it didn't do something.
And would Australia then have to join a military response?
Well, once again, Australia doesn't have to join a military response. I don't think the existing treaties we have will necessarily compel us to respond through such a convoluted chain of events. Yes, we have treaties that say we must react if the United States is itself attacked, but we haven't signed any treaties that say we must help Taiwan. That being said, of course, Taiwan is a fellow democracy. It's a fellow island nation of 20 or so million people. And if we aren't part of a world response to assist Taiwan, how can we expect anyone to assist us if we ever need it in the future?
Do you think this is something that could happen soon? China has become much more bolshy in recent times. Is that a sign of Beijing's willingness to abandon peace?
It's not so much a sign of a willingness to abandon peace as it is a sign of China's murky internal politics. It's a single-party state. It's an authoritarian government. And like every dictatorship kingdom in history, the leader needs to keep the people happy through bread and circuses if necessary, or through fame and fortune often brought about by conquest. So when and if the current regime finds themselves in difficulty at home with its people, whether it's through economic or climate or any other kind of reason, it will probably look towards the good old-fashioned let's go and invade a neighbour to distract the home front's attention.
What do other activities like the militarization of the South China Sea and the suppression of democracy in Hong Kong tell us about modern Chinese political rule?
It tells us that China is a very authoritarian state. It tells us that most of China's actions are about the future of the Chinese Communist Party and not necessarily China itself. Hong Kong was doing extremely well as a tiny little island nation with a booming international trade-based economy, massive cultural influence around the world, massive economic influence around the world. But it didn't conform to what the China's Communist Party demands, and that is loyalty. So it tells us that what the Chinese Communist Party wants, the Chinese Communist Party will try to get.
All of this has alienated Beijing with Western powers. Do they care though?
Well, all this is pretty much aimed at an internal audience. It's all about convincing its own people that the Chinese Communist Party is the future. It is strong, that it is successful. So it doesn't really matter to China's diplomats, China's government, China's leader, what the West thinks. What matters to them is what its own people think. That's how they'll stay in power, and that's what this is all about.
Let's say there's a military dispute between China and the US. Who would win?
Well, nobody would win. We live in a nuclear world. So if China began to lose too much, if the United States began to lose too much, the temptation of a nuclear solution would be pretty powerful. Hopefully there's a lot of ground to cover before they get to that point. But it all comes down to, the mood and temperament of the person in control at the time, the one with their finger on the nuclear trigger.